Um, so we're going to start the body paragraph portion of these videos. To begin with, of course, you're going to need to read the paragraph. I want to give you a few instructions before you do that. Number one, I want you to think about the three parts of a body paragraph, the three eyes, whatever you like. Now, of course, even if you're using the three eyes, what really matters is what those eyes pertain to. This would be the topic sentence, the evidence that you use, and then, of course, how you interpret that evidence, how you use it to prove a point. Anyway, I'm going to give you a second here in the video to go read it. I'm going to post this paragraph because, as you can see, it's too long to sort of scroll through and talk about it. That'd be weird to have you read while I scroll, right? So just pause it here if you need to, read over the paragraph, maybe have it up in another window, and then come back and watch the rest. All right, that was me, again, pausing, hopefully, to let you pause. Now, let's talk about what we have. To begin with, right from the top, the topic sentence. Keep in mind what we said in class about topic sentences. They need to do two things in every body paragraph. Number one, they need to sort of sum up the main idea of your body paragraph, right? And then number two, they need to be argumentative because, of course, hopefully every body paragraph is also argumentative. Well, let's see what we have here. In the beginning of the poem, the writer uses the word beauty to describe what he is thinking. Well, I have a question for you guys. Is that an argument? And a good test always is when you read the poem, right when you're done, if someone were to approach you and say this to you, would you need convincing that the writer uses the word beauty to describe what he is thinking? No, no, you don't, right? He does several times use the word beauty specifically to answer his wife's question when she asks, "What are you thinking?" So, a summary, which is a problem. Of course, like we mentioned in class, you almost never know really what you want to argue right from the jump. You kind of have to work your way to it, you have to figure it out. And so, more often than not, especially early in the process, like a rough draft would be, the very beginning of your body paragraphs are going to be something like this. They're going to either be summary or they're going to be very vague, usually banal claims. So, we're going to work to fix that. So, number one, we know we got to fix it. Number two, sort of we got to keep that in the back of our minds. We got to go hunting as we look through the rest of this body paragraph, thinking about, all right, what am I focused on? Apparently, we want to talk about beauty in some respects, but what am I trying to say about it? How is it behaving in this poem? Maybe how does it affect some of these characters, or what do we learn about the world of these characters as a result of thinking about beauty, right? Always these sort of larger questions. That's what we're aiming at. So let's see. Well, the second I guess, illustrate our evidence. We have a lot of evidence. We have too much evidence, okay? First of all, this first quotation is huge. It's way too long. We're going to talk about it briefly. That's gigantic. You almost never, especially in a paper of this size, have any reason to cite all that. That's bananas. We'll talk about that. But that's not all the evidence. We have this, which is well done. Actually, it's very brief. And we it goes to another sentence. All that's fine. That's really well incorporated. If you're not sure, if you need more examples on how to incorporate quotations, this is really well done. Bear in mind, this student is writing about beauty, so they don't have line numbers. We talked about that in class. If you're doing uh, beauty or body and soul, you don't have to give me line numbers. But for the other poems, you do. Anyway, they then have more evidence. This is too much evidence. Any one of these moments, this one, or this one right here, or this one later, talking about that brief sex scene, any one of those could easily run a body paragraph all on its own. So what happens when you sort of um, when you have an overabundance of evidence, it drowns any possibility you have for argument because you're spending so much time setting up that evidence and then quickly moving to new evidence. You have no room to think on the page. I keep coming back to that phrase. That's where you make your discoveries. For all of you out there who are like, I don't know what I want to say, and I don't really have any ideas, that's true of everyone 98% of the time. There's other 2%, fuck those people, but 98% of the time you don't have any like concrete ideas. This is where you figure that out. I know you may not believe me, but trust me, I've done this a lot. When you write as you write, you're thinking on the page, you're figuring out as you go. But to do that, you have to stick with evidence for longer. Sometimes you do that and you come up with nothing, and those times suck. I'm not going to pretend they don't, but you have to go through that process. That's what it's all part of that. Okay. So a couple things to point out, just to begin work on some of the issues in this paragraph. As I mentioned, this quotation is huge. Um, I'm not saying you can't ever have a longer quotation. Um, to be a stickler to the rules, this would probably be a block quotation. I'm not even going to talk to you about that because, again, there's no reason to have a block quotation, especially in a paper that's 3 pages long. There's absolutely no reason for that. Primarily because of this. We set up the quotation here, right? That's our context. Not bad. Okay. And then we get this long quotation. Okay. Now, here's the issue. It's long. I don't think anyone's debating that. But the times when you can have a quotation of this length is when it's justified. Now, here's what I mean by justifying a quotation. Any quotation you include in your paper, there has to be a reason for it. And you speak to that reason in your analysis. Okay? So when you talk to me after the quotation about what I saw and about, more importantly, what you think about it, it's those thoughts, it's your ideas that justify the inclusion of that quoted material. So, what do we say about it? Well, here's a fun game. Look at how long that quotation is, okay? So it ends at the parenthetical. So everything we say after that's our thoughts about it, right? But they're probably going to end, specifically about that quotation, they're probably going to end right about the time our next quotation starts up, right? So where's that? We're going to scroll. It's right there. So, yeah. Our quotation is longer by a little bit than our thoughts about it, which is a problem. But here again, maybe we say something insightful. Maybe we have a cool idea kind of in this section. Well, what do we say? This is short enough to read. The speaker highlights the fact that heterosexual men don't discuss beauty. The word beauty is something that should not be discussed. We just said that. But then we make a new point by the end of that sentence. It must mean that the man is gay. These men should be talking about things that men talk about, not anything feminine like beauty. That's, again, mostly the same point we made before, but again, we have a little addition there at the end that there's some kind of feminizing quality to this discussion. Okay, so easily half of that could be collapsed into one idea that men shouldn't talk about this, right? We keep saying that in different ways. Number one, we know that because we read the poem, but even if you feel like you have to say it for context, fine. Say it the one time, very first sentence, and you're done. And that will allow you a couple of things. Number one, it'll show you that you're not saying as much as you think you are, even when it's as short as this. And number two, it'll kind of show you what you're left with. We're left with this idea that if you talk about beauty, it somehow brings in questions of your sexuality. Okay. Along with that, as part of that somehow, is this feminizing aspect to their discussion. They're talking about beauty, so they must be feminine in some way, therefore, they must be gay in some way, they must be homosexual. Okay, how do we get that from that quotation? It kind of says that. So still we're not performing analysis really. But what argument could we make from that? The notion that these guys discussing beauty must mean they're homosexuals. Why and why should we care? Before we answer that question, you might be thinking about it, and that's fine. Let's trim this. We don't need all this, right? We have our context up here. I would argue our context could be a little more specific, maybe, but we get the important stuff. These two men, they're talking about beauty. Okay, well, we say it right there. We do not need both. So get rid of this. Cut that first line. We get it in the context. We don't need it. Boom. Okay. Plato and Aristotle and Pater, I suppose, actually. Did we talk about those philosophers? Are we going to? Do you guys feel comfortable talking about philosophers? I'm going to wager you don't. If you want to, then leave it. But if not, okay. Boom. Don't need that. This we seem interested in. First of all, we can cut. But okay, we definitely want that. We talked in class. He doubles down Seems like we definitely want that. And maybe we need some of this, right? That's kind of up to you. That's dealer's choice. Um, to me, it's still a little long. At the very least, it's much shorter, right? We didn't need the front stuff. Here at the back, I mean, if it were me, unless I'm going to talk about the goddamn government and everybody's business, unless that's a point, there's some part of some point I want to make. Probably going to cut that, right? You're not supposed to have that period. Boom. All right. So let's read the sentence. We'll start up here. He says this word aloud, makes him think back to 63. He was sitting and listening to what these two men had to say about beauty on a television broadcast. Let's clean that up even more. Well, that's going to be repetitive. Offering that they might be homosexuals, right? And then you're right into the quotation. This is much more focused, right? It gives the reader less to deal with. Importantly, it gives you less to deal with so you can focus more on what you may want to talk about. And then we'll see what we come up with, right? Again, it's that bigger question. Was it here? Oh, wait, sorry. All right. So that's all we say about that quotation now. It looks a little better because the quotation is shorter, but still, we have to somehow answer this question about why is beauty a feminizing force when these guys even mention it? Moreover, why do they care that it's a feminizing force? I think these are questions you guys can answer, but it's not answered on the page here, so we need to do that. And if you want to think about why or how that might tie into questions of sexuality, how these men are viewed primarily by other men in Kansas, I suppose, you can talk about that too, right? But we're not talking about any of that right now. We're just kind of gesturing toward information that we get ourselves when we read the quotation. So we're still not making an argument. Those are that's by and large what you want to do with every quotation, okay? Trim it first, see what you're actually saying, and decide, well, am I making an argument? If not, you have to address that. Let's look at one more quotation. I don't know that we're going to look at all of these. All right. So it's not to say that you can't use more than one quotation in a paragraph, but oftentimes, especially when I see you guys do this, I know you're headed for trouble. When you say another example, you are literally simply pointing at one thing that we just looked at and saying, all right, you know how that thing was an example of something? I'm going to point at something super similar. And again, I think part of your grade school training maybe led you to think that's a good idea, but keep in mind, we're supposed to be making arguments. We've yet to make one in this paragraph, and that's a problem. But even if you are making an argument, it doesn't really help your case to simply say, look, here it is again. We don't need that. If you made a cogent argument before this sentence, right? That's enough. You 9 out of 10 times I will say that's enough on its own, right? More often than not, though, you've not made an argument because again, we barely said anything, right? So what happens instead is you run out of steam, you just move on too quickly, and you go to, as we say, another example, but you're going to steamroll through that one too. You're going to not say much of anything about that one either, and you're going to move to another. You can just, all you guys do is you stack evidence on top of themselves until you feel like you have the length of a paragraph. That's not going to help you make an argument. That's another trick, another way you have of tricking yourselves into thinking you're accomplishing more than you are. Well, let's see what we say here. So we're talking about Uncle Ross. He calls the centerpiece lovely. Again, I mean, I know this is being a little bit of a look. You can say the word centerpiece. We're not really focused on that, are we? We're focused on the word lovely. So do that. We learn that the father left the room. Again, I mean, come on now. You have left the room in your vocabulary, right? Okay. The use of this word, along with his uncle's possessive tap dancing and where he was visiting from, probably mentioned that, paints the picture that his father was bothered by his uncle's assumed homosexuality. How? How? Do we say it? Take a second if you need to. I'll wait a minute. And obviously pause it if you need to. How does it paint that picture? Have we spelled that out on the page? No, we have not. So that's problem number one. Number two, and I think it helps if we address number one, but number two, I still don't know why that matters. What do we learn about maybe the speaker's father, or again, the world that the speaker is from? What do we maybe learn, taking it back to the other video, about how assumptions, like assumed behavior, or about how stereotypes work on people, right? We have to try our best to get at some of those questions here. The step, first of all, is explaining our own observations. This is the beginning of an argument because you're saying the father assumes that Uncle Ross is gay, right? That's an argument that we haven't proven. I think we could. But then when we start to do that, we're going to give ourselves more ammunition to, as I keep saying, talk about those bigger questions, do our best to try to answer those bigger questions. Why do we care that the speaker's father thinks that Uncle Ross is gay? Right? To put it very simply, why should we care? All right, last but not least, and another example. I'm having a joke here. Another example of the issue I keep talking about. Look at this. We're going to start talking about the next piece of evidence right here. We say nothing about that. We say nothing about Uncle Ross. Look at that. That's a huge moment that we, again, handle really well, quoting the material, really well integrating it into these sentences. We say nothing about it because we're so quickly on to the next thing. That's what I'm talking about with having too much evidence. So anyway, it would embarrass him or any other man. We talked about that in class. That's another great moment from the poem. Well, what do we do? Using these instances. So immediately, linguistically, I know this because I read a lot. You're telling me as a reader, I'm not going to talk about this. The last thing I just said, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about them all together, which means I am in no way going to be super specific about this, which sucks because that's what you're supposed to do, right? The speaker shows how using words that are not appropriate for men can be stereotypical. I don't know what that means. I think I have an idea, but the way that I'm not really. Are we simply saying men don't speak this way because that's a stereotype they're supposed to adhere to? If so, yeah. Uh, yeah. It makes them uncomfortable. We've said that. He uses these memories to display an understanding. We don't have time in this video. I'll do it at some point in class, but all these words are getting in the way. Look, he can use these words freely. Okay. So he, meaning the speaker, watch that. We are saying the same thing, and now it's so much clearer. We got all that trash out of there, right? All that you guys do. All you do that. We got all that unnecessary language out of there. The speaker can use these words freely now that he is not only out of rural Kansas, but that the times have changed. Okay, last thing, and then we're done with the video. You guys made it. We have yet to make an argument in this body paragraph, and that is a problem. The first thing we would do, trim evidence where we could. And if it helps, if you have multiple pieces of evidence, space them apart like this. Really do some soul searching and kind of figure out, where am I talking about this quotation? Where am I talking about this quotation? And just map it out like this for yourself. And sometimes you'll have moments like this where you're not saying anything, right? And you'll have moments like this where you're starting to say something, but you just kind of stop because you moved on too quickly, right? That can help you figure out what to do next. Maybe you have more to say. Maybe you have more to say here, or maybe you don't, in which case you cut it, right? If you have nothing to say, then why would it be in your paper? Maybe you don't address it at all. We don't address this part at all. Lose it. Lose it. Use it in another body paragraph if you want. But we're not doing anything with it here, so why do we have it? All right, lastly though, as I mentioned in class, and I know I tell you guys a lot of things, when you make an argument or when you even start to make an argument, most of the time it's going to occur right near the bottom of your body paragraphs because, as I keep saying, you're going to think as you write, you're going to think on the page, and even if you don't mean to or want to, those thoughts are going to come to a head at the end of those body paragraphs in some kind of way. And they do it here too. like I pointed out, we know all this. This isn't really we that's pretty obvious from reading the poem. But this last sentence, the speaker can use these words freely now that he is not only out of Kansas, but that the times have changed. There's some implied arguments there, right? Specifically, to do with sort of regional assumptions about masculinity and also temporal ones. That's a fancy word for having to do with time. They're kind of arguing that the reason the speaker isn't like he once was, by the way, when he makes this observation, right? He was a boy when he made this observation. The reason he's not like that at the end of the poem, he can say beauty, he seems like a pretty different guy, is because he left Kansas and because the world around him has changed too. I don't know that we can talk about both of those in a single body paragraph. I would hazard to say probably not. But either one of those would be great to think about. Like, basically, what I'm saying is what it seems like we're trying to get at here at the end is how does a person's region, the regional stereotypes, the expectations, the assumed behaviors, how do those inform how they see people, right? Or what they think specifically here men are supposed to be like. Um, that's the start to another one of those bigger questions, those kinds of arguments that we keep talking about. And they begin to do it here. The trouble is this paragraph is over. So they would need to kind of keep that in the back of their mind, be thinking about it. We got to take another pass at this whole thing. Let's talk about this quotation, but from the angle of, all right, this is somehow emblematic of those regional expectations that are kind of programmed into the speaker as a boy, right? So what does that mean for him then? How does it shape him then? Versus if you want to have another quotation, maybe even just mention the fact that he says the word beauty at the end of the poem, right? So that is very clearly a symbol or proof, if you like, that he's been altered in some fundamental way. Well, in what way? What is he not worried about anymore? We kind of talk about some of that here. Why isn't he worried about it? What does it suggest about him? Again, more importantly, the world he came from. Any of those, you have to answer any or all of those. Take a shot at all of them, go nuts. But that's the kind of work I want to see you all do. And what it means is, if you take nothing else away from this video, you have got to talk about your evidence much, 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 much more than it's being talked about here. And again, I chose this rough draft because it was pretty emblematic of, exemplary, if you like, of a lot of the work I saw you guys turn in. You're trained to think that you're going to drown me with evidence and you're going to move very quickly by just pointing to different parts of the poem. But when you do that, that's pretty much all you do. You just point to things and basically tell me that's important, that's important, that's important. And you never really stop to tell me why. That part's hard. And if you feel like you're getting stuck at various times, that just means you're thinking. That means you're doing the hard work. But that's you got to leave yourself there. I promise you, I know that it sucks. It's not fun. But that's you like doing push-ups in your head basically. That's you doing this exercise. That's hard. That's how you get better at it.